Josh, and the clip that you just saw was our interactive music space. It was a few people kind of walking through and interacting and having reactions to some of the different combinations of instruments, melodies, and textures that we designed for that experience. For this presentation, I first wanted to show you that so that you can kind of get an idea of what the output of this creative project was. Kind of talk about some of my what I think was one of the most important aspects of getting this project done, and then for the last part, I kind of show you how we built the system. I've actually got a conversation that I had with Jeff Files, my main partner in this project, where we talk about the pieces of software that we used, how we planned everything out, and that's actually a great segue into what I really want to talk about, which is the main reason for our success in this project, and the reason why we got through with it so quickly was our planning and our organization. The first thing I'll say is, if you are in 490 and you are coming up with a project for 491, I'll say I went ahead and started the planning and organizing aspect of the project as soon as I got approval from faculty. So as soon as you get that approval, don't waste any time. You don't have to get everything done like that first week, but go ahead and start planning out exactly how everything is supposed to go. Because when we sat down and we came up with a full structure of the full plan of how we were going to actually implement the entire strategy, I think that's really the crux of our success. And that's definitely something that I learned out of this is just how important that is. But not only that, just communicating with the different people that you have to work with in any creative endeavor. In this case, it was with 13 musicians, plus some engineers, John Shannon, who's in 491 as well, and Dylan Ragland, making sure that the communication is clear and efficient. So yeah, that's what I think is probably the most important, especially in a project like this. All of the specifically creative aspects of it, come with it, but the most important part of putting it all together is going to be the organization and the communication. So from here, I'll put in a clip of me and Jeff just talking about how we organized everything, and that'll be the end of this. I will go ahead and say, before I forget, that I'm actually recording this on November the 10th, which is the first day that you can vote for South by Southwest panel pickers. They're kind of like crowdsourced way of picking panels for that music conference. So and Jeff and I did submit our interactive music space for it. So if you find this stuff interesting, definitely go. I'll throw a link in the description. Definitely go vote for us. The other link that I'll throw in there is our website that we kind of set up. It also has, not only does it have the clip that we showed, but it has a full, kind of description of what we did. Plus, it also has an audio recording of tons of different combinations of instruments that could be presented through the system. So definitely go check it out. But without further ado, here's our conversation. I did want to let Jeff and myself kind of talk about how we set everything up as we planned everything going into the practical building and recording of everything, and how that helped us get through that stuff a lot faster. So what I'm showing you here is the piece of notation that I wrote out for the instruments. And this is using a piece of software called Sibelius. What it lets you do is just write out notation. It's these notes that are on these lines. A, a musician that knows how to read this can take that and interpret it, what it's supposed to sound like on their instrument, and play it. Doing this and using the software does two things for us. The first thing is it makes it to where I can just give these parts to these musicians, and we don't have to rehearse. Those musicians can just come into the studio and play what's on the page. And because I intentionally made this composition pretty basic, they were in most cases able to come in and completely knock it out in 2 takes, making it to where sessions didn't last much longer than 2 hours if they lasted even that long. The second thing it was able to let us do was each of these instruments here I can export individually as a MIDI file. So it takes whatever I write here and gives me like audio, an audio representation of what it's supposed to sound like. And that made it to where, as Jeff was kind of structuring his program, I was able to give him finished demos essentially of these instruments so we can put them together, make sure they sound okay together, and make sure that the system worked. Sibelius was pretty imperative in that. So we decided on a 30 bar piece at 60 beats per minute, which makes a 2-minute piece of music, which isn't very long. We decided on some chords here that we kind of wrote into 5-bar phrases. So before I show you what instruments we put in here, this is just kind of like an example. This instrument plays these chords, and has some busy notes and a pretty interesting rhythm, all the way until the 5th bar, and then it kind of rests. And if we look at other instruments, very similar thing here. On the 5th bar, everybody kind of rests and takes a little breath. What my plan here was even if instruments kind of start sounding or start becoming a little too interesting as far as like rhythms or things like that, at least on the 5th bar, everyone is going to come in and it's going to sound together. So we do this every 5 bars, and that's essentially a 5-bar phrase. 5-bar phrase, 5-bar phrase, again 5-bar phrase. So this brings some cohesiveness to the piece, even though really it's written so that these pieces or these instruments can play around and have very little cohesiveness at the same time. So the next thing, after we kind of decided the structure and the length and everything of the piece, we were trying to decide how many instruments we wanted to do. And originally we had wanted to do 5 sections on the floor with 5 instruments in each section, resulting in 25 instruments. When I sat down to write out 5 sections of 5 instruments. It became kind of daunting, and I didn't feel like it was really doable. So we decided to go ahead and uh, scale it down to 16 instruments. But our idea was to write a main composition for 16 instruments and then write an alternate composition for the same 16 instruments, and put in the program to be able to swap between these two compositions. Now, both compositions use the same chords, are the same tempo, the same length of time, and they are still designed to be able to be played interchangeably with each other. So you'll still hear a good sound when we have them start blending together, but it made it to where I could have more um, interchangeability because now I have 32 parts instead of 25, but I really only realistically have to write out 16 parts plus some chords. So, and I'll show you what that kind of means here in a second. So here's the instruments that we decided on: violin, viola, cello, bass, flute, sax, clarinet. We kind of didn't know if we wanted to use soprano sax, but we definitely got in a French horn player. And you'll see here that these instruments, again, this is going to be the main composition. It's pretty busy. There's some melodic lines, some pretty interesting rhythms that you can hear between these, and they'll swap in between each other and kind of come in and out. And then you'll see that we have the same instruments written out here, but if you're not super up on music theory, these are whole notes. This just tells the musician to just hold these notes for that entire bar. And we do have some dynamics here to, again, bring some cohesiveness to the piece, but this is all they got for the alternate. But what that's going to do is it's going to give more chances for the piece to change as people walk through and interact with the system. So I would call those the main instruments. We also have harp and vibraphone, and they've got some pretty interesting things going on here. But really, we kind of segmented these off into as synth instruments. So we also have some electric keyboard playing some synth chords and things like that. And then we have some standard, I would say, rock band instruments. We have piano, bass, guitar, and drums. And for those, I actually used Logic to kind of sketch out some ideas because I actually didn't want to make those instruments too rigid in what they had to play, because generally those kind of musicians are playing by ear for the most part, and I felt like that was going to be the most comfortable way that if I got musicians in for them to record something. So I just kind of sketched out some ideas so that Jeff had some demo tracks to use, and I kind of had a good idea of the type of sound that I wanted for it, because we were able to take these alongside with the MIDI tracks that we got from Sibelius and put them together and see what worked, see what didn't work when we played them together with the program. So that is the majority of what I did to get set up. The next big thing I had to do was come up with a way to schedule all those musicians, which I'll probably save for another time. But so I'll let Jeff talk about how he structured the actual program itself.
Cool. Yeah, so super excited to work with Josh on this. Came to me with the idea, and it seemed super interesting and something that I hadn't really heard of before. So tackling a problem like this programmatically is pretty interesting from the get-go of it. the biggest and the first hurdle we had to find is how we were going to be able to control each of these instruments programmatically, or like on a basis of individual control, while the song was staying in time with itself. So searching for anything that could get that done without having to write it from scratch was the first big hurdle. And side by side with that one would be the hurdle of how we were going to manage that in a 3D space in the real world. I had considered writing a system to handle that with using just web cameras or some kind of cameras hooked up to a computer, but the time frame and the technical aspect of that would, while probably end up being a better system in the end, would take far too long to actually implement, and would kind of kill real production value if this were to be pushed to some kind of market. So using a pre-set up tracking system like a VR set that we have here in the room suits most of those needs perfectly fine. Nothing crazy. We use the HTC Vive, but it would work with any standard VR system, which also made it easy because there are pre-existing libraries that exist to allow me to use this in a game engine. We chose Unity for the project. Works great, allows me to manage this very easily without much hassle. And then on top of that, it gave us a foundation to really start planning how this should go. So the idea when we first discussed it was really splitting the ensemble, or for lack of a better term, ensembles into separate sections and allow the users individual control in a 3D space. When I was drawing up plans, I decided that having the room split up into its own sections with individual instruments assigned to each zone would probably end up being the better route for this. So that's kind of how the whole system was structured and like based when we started. And then just looking around for tools that gave us that control. I found a tool called Fmod. Let me see if I can pull up. Called Fmod that allows us to integrate high-end audio workstation techniques and ideas into a 3D or like programmatic environment. Allows me full control while still giving Josh the fidelity and the control he needs over the music to actually still sound good. And allows me to control each individual instrument simultaneously while the track is playing all at once, which fit the bill perfectly. So here is the actual Unity game engine that we're using to run all of this. This is a top-down view of what the room would look like. This lighter teal square is the actual play size of the room, which is all configured by the VR headset on its own. Nothing we have to change. It does it dynamically, so it'll map to every room. And then each one of these 4 zones is actually... let me see if it'll let me... There we go. Each one of these 4 zones allows me to dynamically assign each set of sounds to itself. So each zone is a set of instruments, which we have set up here. One for all the strings, one for the piano synths, the piano synths and the harp. And then we have a percussion section, and then the winds are also in their own separate zone. So each zone has its own area, and then each individual person in each one of the zones counts for one of those instruments per ensemble, so that it can manipulate and create interesting dynamics between all of the zones without it being overbearing or without it being overly complex. It's very manageable, which also means in the future this would allow us to swap out tracks whenever we wanted to, and whatever order, if you wanted to create new ideas or test new songs. So very easy to change and manipulate, and it's just walking through the zones. Doesn't need to be hooked up to a camera, should not have to have any kind of powerful machine to run it, should be able to just hook up the trackers and go.
Cool. But thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you.